Good morning, everybody. PA Figs here. It is cold. I think it got down to 22 last night. It's like 34 now. It's chilly, but it is time to do the next part of this getting your figs ready for winter video. So as you can see, the orchard is now ready for its hibernation. It is ready to get moved into where I store my trees, which is the garage. I'll show you what the garage looks like before, and I'll show you what it looks like afterwards. The first part, however, of getting your fig trees ready was removing the leaves, getting them ready. Second part was to spray the trees and continue getting them ready. This third part, the first thing I want to start off with is air layers. I've got a couple of them. You can see there's one here, and there's one there. And these air layers need to be removed before I put it into storage. You could leave them on all winter. You're not going to get too much additional growth out of them. So what I want to do is take these off, and you can see that there's not a huge root system on this for this very, very large air layer. When I first put this on, I mean, these were only about this long. They grew significantly over the summer. So I was actually afraid to take it off, because I didn't think there'd be enough root material to support that large of a tree. So now, by waiting for it to go dormant, the foliage is not calling for as much nutrients from the roots and as much moisture from the roots. So I'm going to cut this off. I'll probably bring it inside. I have found that these air layers don't do well in storage over the winter if they're disconnected. So I want to get it up potted, and I want to bring it into the house and let that root ball grow a little bit over the winter. I may also put it in the greenhouse, although, again, it's not fully warm in there. I mean, it stays around 50 at night, and when it gets down to the 20s, it's maybe 60 at most during the day. Any colder than that, it starts to get a little bit chilly in there. So I want to bring this into a nice warm environment, maybe even putting on a heat mat over the winter. So let me get my shears out and we'll cut this off. Alright, so I've got my trusty shears, and it's funny, I put this air layer on here because of the sucker that was coming out aside from the main branch, and now you can see I'm going to cut this air layer off, and there's another sucker growing from it. So that might be a good air layer for the spring. And look at how thick this branch got here. I may not be able to cut this with one hand. I may even have to get something bigger to cut it with. Yeah, I'm definitely not going to be able to do it with one hand. Alright, let me cut this and get back to you. Alright, so I'm almost through. Let's get this last little bit. There we go. And this air layer is off. Okay, maybe not quite off. I must have, looks like I have some roots growing out of the air layer. Let's see if I can get those. There we go. Alright, and here is my air layer. And this root mass is not nearly what I would have liked, but there are roots through there, and you can see the roots sticking out the bottom. So I'm glad I waited until this was dormant to pull this off, because I don't think there's nearly, this air layer got a lot larger than I expected. And this was just sphagnum moss. I don't think I'll do that again. I'm not real happy with how it came out. I think I'll mix it with potting mix next time, or some sort of peat moss. So I'll get this up potted and keep it someplace warm to get it grown a little bit. And the roots, it's almost like a semi-rooted cutting. The air layer is not fully formed in there, but you can see there are definitely roots. So it's going to be more like a very large cutting with some roots that started that'll give the cutting a real good jump start. And this is my Genovese Nero. I wanted to get a duplicate of it. So this will get going. I may even cut some of this off. As you can see, it grew kind of funky. It was laying down. But yeah, we wanted to get this air layer off. One more to go. Okay, next we have an air layer on my Bordeaux Negra Ramada. I haven't checked this one out, but let's see how it looks. You can see it's a much smaller air layer. Shouldn't need as much root mass. Oh yeah. You can see the roots growing along the side of it there. Definitely a good set of roots on this one. Much better than the Genovese Nero, actually. So we get our trusty clippers. And I can't stress enough how important it is to buy a good pair of clippers for cutting these air layers or even the cuttings off. And these are ARS clippers. I'll put a link below to my Amazon store where you can buy them. They have been great over the last few years. This is about the perfect size for cutting. That last air layer was a little bit too large for these, but it did work. So let's go ahead and cut this off. I may have to put the camera down just so the air layer doesn't fall and crash. It is a little fragile, so you want to be gentle with it. But you can see these will go right through. So let me pause this so I can use both hands. Okay, so I got that air layer off. And you can see the roots on this guy are very well developed. So this guy I'm going to put into a pot, and still has a little green growth popping out here. So this one I may actually put into the greenhouse and see if it will leaf back out for a little while and continue to grow. Plenty of root system to support it, so not real worried about it. But to give you a size comparison, here are the two air layers. You can see that one got, the Genovese Nero got monstrous. So I may have to take some cuttings off the top of that. Minimize the size that's going to require that root ball there. We'll see how it does. Okay, so that's the first step of part 3 of getting your trees ready. The next part is cuttings. So now's a good time if you've got friends that, you know, want to take some cuttings and want to share your cuttings with people or sell them or whatever you're looking to do. So a question I get a lot is, how do I take cuttings? And there's nothing that could be easier. I'll post a link to a video I did a couple years ago with Teresa that shows how we like to trim our trees. But really, you can cut any part of your tree off and make it into a cutting for people to grow. The one thing I will say is you want to make sure there's at least 3 nodes. And when I say nodes, that is a node. That is where new growth, new leaves, new branches will form out of. You want to make sure that there's at least 1, 2, 3 of those in your cutting. And the reason I say that is you're going to cut below this node, and your root system is likely going to form from this node. Your leaves and branches will then form from one of these 2 nodes, or the tip node if it's a tip cutting. And you want to have at least 2, because if one of these gets damaged or doesn't produce, then you have another one that will. So theoretically, you could take a cutting that was just a single node, and it will grow, but it's more challenging and more risky, because if something happens to that one node, your entire cutting is done. So I'll usually like to take at least 3 nodes, and I like to do at least, I would say, 4 or 5 inches minimum. It just makes it easier when you're using like a baggy method, or depending on what rooting method you're using, to get a couple of those nodes in the soil for the roots to form. It makes it more stable in the soil, so it's not going to pull those roots off as they're forming. And it gives you a little bit of extra risk prevention to make sure that you get good roots growing out of your cutting. Above the soil, I like to use a grafting tape to wrap around here. And all that does is preserves that cutting from drying out. Certain parts of the country, you don't have to worry about it. Here in Pennsylvania, the winter is extremely dry. And what you'll find happens is these cuttings will dry out as the cold air approaches them. Now, there's other things you can do, like putting them in a humidity chamber or humidity bin. I sometimes use an aquarium with a piece of plastic over it, and I leave a little bit of liquid in it, and that raises the humidity. Now, some of the problems you'll face with humidity is you'll get fungus, you'll get fungus gnats, and you'll get other things that make growing these difficult. So for me personally, I find wrapping them the easiest way to do it. There's tape called buddy tape, there's parafilm, there's different things. I'll see if I can find a link and include that in my Amazon store below as well for easy access for you. So I'm not going to do how to grow a cutting in this part. This is preparing our trees. But if you wanted to take your cuttings, now's a good time to do it. What I will say is only take the cuttings that you're ready to trade, sell, give away at that time. don't take the cutting if you're not going to give it away for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 2 months, because then you have to preserve them, and they don't last all that long. They tend to lose their vitality. There are things you can do to store them in the fridge and keep them for longer, and they will root, but the likelihood of them rooting goes down, in my opinion, exponentially as they age. So I won't take the cuttings off my trees until I'm ready to sell them or trade them or give them away. So that is pretty much it for part 3. I think I'm going to quickly move into making the part 4 video, which is moving my trees into storage. So I'm going to cut this video off. I'll try to link part 4 and get that video out here pretty fast following to this one, just to try to keep the video length a little bit shorter for those of you like me that have poor attention spans and can't watch more than 10 minutes because I know I struggle with it. So, all right, so that's part 3. That's taking your air layers off, taking your cuttings, and I will show just a quick cutting here as I was showing on this guy. So the other thing to keep track of is which way the branch faces. You see this area here is where this, oh, why am I having problems here? My camera does not want to focus for you guys. I apologize. Okay, so taking this cutting, if I can get this thing to focus, the other thing to be careful of, so that's the cutting you want to give away to somebody, but for your tree that you're going to be left with, you want to make sure your top node that you cut above is facing the direction of outward. You don't want to cut above this guy that's facing in towards the tree, because that branch will then grow into your tree. You want to cut something like this node here, where it is facing outward. So I'm going to go ahead and take this cutting above that node. And you can see now, I've got the next node that's going to grow. This part here will harden off, nothing will grow out of it, but the next node below it will be where the next branch forms, and it'll form outward from the tree to allow aeration through the center of the tree. And here is my cutting. So this is a single Barnesote cutting. And you can see it's a tip cutting, which means that it has an end tip. I don't know there's too much of a difference for me in rooting end tip versus, if I were to cut this in half, for instance, I'd end up with one mid cutting and one tip cutting. I haven't had a problem rooting either one, or I should say I haven't found either one to be more productive than the other. What I will say is when you have a mid cutting, you can wrap that parafilm or that wrap all the way around the top of it and provide no escape for moisture, versus a tip cutting, you can't really wrap the tip. Either one works. Some people prefer one or the other. For me, though, that's a real nice cutting there, and I'm going to probably trade this with somebody that was asking for it. But yeah, that's taking the cuttings.